Hey, Mark. How are you, man? Good to see you. Things all right?
Sorry I didn't leave the meeting, college before the unveil. But it was great meeting.
Do you have networks that you can get the word out about?
Yes. Yeah. Well, the Emory schools goes a lot around the after school.
You watched the Little League game yesterday? Yeah. And they give
Tony, you want me to corral him?
I got 3 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be good. Just say you're coming in. Usually go to the garden or the park. We'll come up to Midtown. We don't usually go to that side of the south side of the Say yes. I will sometime. I'll come in and grab you. Dr. Watson, nobody wants to win the NL East.
You know what? All I can say is it's really just as bad as the Braves right now.
Listen, what? The Phillies are worse than the Braves. The Braves, have that 3-game lead. I think the Braves are going to do it. I really do.
Break my heart.
I think they're going to do it. Hey, Joe.
So I got this dispensation. The anthem's easy, so
Oh, good. Yeah, I think so. So. 2 minutes. Bill. Well, it's good to see everybody. If you haven't received a packet yet, come on up front. Mark, can I use your hands for a second? Can you be mindful of people coming in and maybe getting them packets? Has everybody received a packet who's here? Anybody not? Out there. Great. Good. Well, it's good to see everybody this morning. Thanks for being here. Also welcome those who are live streaming with us on our various platforms. Probably most of you are streaming through Facebook. So if you really want to stay connected, you could be in the room and get your phone out and watch Facebook all at the same time. But I would not suggest that. It would create a weird echo, I'm pretty sure. So it's good to be together. I want to just say that a group, and some of you were here Tuesday night because you're elders and came last Tuesday and are here again, so thank you. We had a College of Elders gathering I know some of you couldn't be there, and so this town hall fits your schedule really well. But we went through this material and some other things on Tuesday night in about a 2-hour session with the College of Elders, really focusing on what's being launched out of the Long Range Strategic Plan. The fruit of that plan, the outcomes of that plan, what's been happening around various ministry areas. And today we're just solely focusing on one of the aspects which comes out of our Long Range Strategic Plan, which I'll say something in just a minute about our forward thinking. And so the genesis of the outcomes of our new governance model, which has a lot of similarities to our current governance model, and has some new opportunities for us, is all born out of and motivated by that plan. And I'm going to share a little bit about process and then get down to sort of the nitty-gritty of what's changing and what's staying the same, and then opening up for question and answer. Okay? Does that sound like a good plan? Without the Lord, our plans perish. And so let me pray. Lord, thank you for gathering this group together. Thank you for those who are watching online. We thank you for those dedicated folks who have served in various ways on various teams, not just in this most recent season of our long-range strategy and vision as we approach our 175th anniversary, but also those who have come before us. For those in this room, but also for parents and grandparents and brothers and sisters in Christ who have laid the foundation for us to be faithful, knowing that there were seasons of change, knowing that there were seasons where new decisions were being made and new opportunities were being embraced. So we pray that you give us a spirit that is both rooted in our tradition, but also open to your spirit, so that we be faithful to who you're calling us to be. For Atlanta, for the world, and for one another, we pray in Christ's name. Amen. So let me just start at the very beginning. I'm going to walk through. It's not a PowerPoint. I wanted to get things in your hand. Mark Mayette has those sheets, these packets. Let me just do a couple of housekeeping-related items to this. I want you to know how long of a process this whole conversation was really rooted in, how long that took. So back in June of 2017, so over a year ago, we were, and it was actually earlier in the spring, where we asked the congregation, and many of you remember this, and many of you signed up, not for this per se, but for other ministry goal teams, where people self-selected and volunteered. We had over 100 people from the congregation step up and say, I want to serve in a particular way. And one of those particular ways was in our forward thinking, which was our 7th goal in our long-range plan, under the heading of governance and leadership. And so that work began in June. I'm going to say more about those folks in just a minute. It was the iterations of this document, which we're calling our leadership life, really went through 5 major changes. Gavin, what is that? Do you know what that is? I don't think it's me. It can't be me. But we've had 5 iterations of this document and changes, both from the governance team itself, that small group of people that worked on it, and then when it got into the hands of the session worked on it for 4 months, which in session time is a pretty significant amount of time. So every month from March, April, May, and June, we spent at least an hour in conversation and in prayer around this proposal. So it was vetted thoroughly, not just by that governance team, but also by the session. The formal motion is on the front. I'm going to skip that because it'll just take some time to read it. You can read it on your own, and what I have to say about the proposal is less formal than that, and getting into the weeds of it, we'll get there without having to deal with the proposal. So just open up to the inside part of the packet. Would be page 2, technically. And let me just give a couple of highlights. As leaders, when we think of leadership in the life of any Presbyterian church, we say that we are people of the book. And when we talk about our community and life together, not just our leadership, but our way of being Christian in the world, we say that we're people of the book. Of course, we have the book of Scripture, which is our rule and guide for our faith. Then we have the book of order, which is the governance book that we use to guide our worship and our discipline and our life together. And then we have our Book of Confessions, which are in time, in place, theological reflecting points about the Scriptures and about what it means to be the people of God. And then in an overarching way, we have the congregational bylaws. And those bylaws are set by the congregation. Let me just do a little quick switch here. Okay, check. Perfect. Whew. I feel like Beyonce. Who saw Beyonce last night? Anybody? Come on, one person went to see Jay-Z, Beyonce? Okay, they were here. If you don't know about them, Google them. They were at the Mercedes last night. So we have congregational bylaws that are approved by the congregation. And then what we have is something called the net report. And the net report is nominating, electing, and training leaders. And that is our supplement locally here at First Presbyterian Church. That is our supplemental document that sort of fills in some gaps and some logistics where the Book of Order gives us freedom to do so. Does that make sense? So that is where the Book of Order gives us the canopy, and then we sort of set up the table through the net report under that canopy. Does that make sense? So that's what that is. And that document has oversight by the session. It's not a congregational document, it's a session document. So those are the sort of the books, quote unquote, that guide our leadership and our faith and life together. The charge from the long-range strategic planning team was to reshape our structure, operations, and communications to prepare the congregation for our third century of ministry. That exact line, and I call him out every time he's in the room and I read this line, was penned by Jim Hassan. Jim, raise your hand. I want to give you full credit or full blame for this one. Jim, when we were in the long-range strategic planning mode, this was a year-long process in 15 to 16 into 17. Jim had us focus not just our 175th anniversary, but he said, what would it be like for us to think even further out for our third century of ministry together? And so that was the charge right from the long-range strategic plan. The action was to eliminate inefficiencies in session, council, and staff structures and procedures in favor of the most transformative use of our spiritual talents and training. And that action item motivated us to think critically about our governance. Okay, not about the Book of Order and critiquing it, but are we set up in the 21st century, knowing what we know about this city, knowing what we know about where God is calling us to be and to do, and what God is calling us to do? Are we set up from a governance perspective for what God intends for us in this next chapter of faith and life together? That was a prevailing question for this governance group. Now, if you're in the room and you're on this list, I'd invite you to stand. And I know we saw many of these folks on Tuesday night, and some are here again. Ryan Bonfilio, our scholar in residence, just stay standing, please. Frank Brannon, Bobby Candler, Jim Hassan, Helen Hatch, Stephanie Lane, Rebecca Lamont, Granvette Matthews, I know she's out of town this week, me, Mike Tillman, Mary Ellen Vian, who's also our clerk of session, Gail White, and David Watson. I saw David come in earlier, okay? So this group, thank you all for standing. This group, and those who are not here, whose names I read, met 8 times from June 2017 to March of 2018 for a total of 16 hours of work. That was just in-person work. There was a lot of work done online as well, and in sort of subgroups. And I just want to point out, and this is important, that group collectively represents 216 years of membership in this church. So these aren't folks who have just come in and don't know what the what is here at First Presbyterian Church. These are folks who know the long history, they know the stories, and they were ready to bring that to bear, that knowledge and that experience, but also to be open to what God would have for us into the future. Now, some of the foundational commitments for leadership in the life of our church, and you could broadly apply this to any church, I think, but these are just some of the guiding principles this group of individuals were working under, theological and biblical principles. Number one is that we believe leadership is about vocation. Leadership is about call. We know that in a lot of Presbyterian churches, not this one, but a lot of Presbyterian churches out there, and a lot of churches, if you do your time in membership, if you're here for 20 years, then you ought to be on session, or you ought to do this, or you ought to do that. That's not what the Bible or what our theology teaches us. What it teaches us is that leaders are called. They're called by God, and they're confirmed in our tradition by the power of the Holy Spirit through the voice of the congregation. That's really important for our life together. That leaders, it's not an expectation that one day if you put in your time or do this or accomplish this, that you're going to be a leader. Leadership is about vocation. It's about call. God's called you, and it's been confirmed by the congregation. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is gift-based ministry. This is the default example I use thinking about children's Sunday school. We wouldn't have someone come to us and say, hey, I want to teach third grade Sunday school. And then Sarah K. Bumgardner, our children's director, says, well, why do you want to teach third grade Sunday school? That's great. Well, I really dislike third graders, and I think they need to be put in their place. They need to be disciplined. Well, what do you want to teach them? I want to teach them rules. Forget all this Bible stuff. I want to teach them how to obey their elders. And that's they're not gifted for third grade Sunday school, right? Can we agree to that? They're probably not gifted for third grade Sunday school. The same is true for every leadership role in the life of the church. Some people are gifted for certain things, and others are gifted for other things. I don't sing solos in worship, right? There's a reason for that. And just as if we wouldn't have someone who doesn't have the musical gift lead in worship in that way, just like we wouldn't have somebody who dislikes third graders teach third grade Sunday school, leadership has particular requirements, particular gifts. And in various areas of our church, we believe in gift-based ministry, which means that we believe some people have gifts to be elders and some people don't. Some people have gifts to be Sunday school teachers and some people don't. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's the church. That's Romans 12, or 1 Corinthians 12. That's the body of Christ. That's who we are. Finally, servant leadership, and this is a new emphasis for us, relatively new, at least in formality, not in theory. But we believe in servant leadership, which means that we believe that leaders are here to serve. Leaders are here not, as the scriptures say, to lord it over somebody. Leaders are here to lead like Jesus, and Jesus leads with humility. He leads with service. He gets down on a knee and washes the disciples' feet. So these three prevailing ideas, these big ideas, are what grounded our conversations as this team for the leadership life of the church. Okay, if you turn the page. There is something that is called ordered ministry in the life of the church. And this is a very Presbyterian thing. And ordered connects to the word ordination, right? You think of that in your head. That in the PCUSA, in our denomination, the Book of Order allows for three offices for ordination. Three. The first one is called, by the Book of Order's definition, these aren't my words or the team's words, this is the Book of Order, calls it the ministry of discernment and governance. And there's a body called the session that their job is the ministry of discernment and governance. It's a very discrete role that a session member plays as a spiritual leader in the life of the church. We have that already, currently, in our model for leadership. The next ordered ministry that the Book of Order allows is the ministry of service and compassion. Again, the words from the Book of Order. And the ministry of service and compassion often falls under the heading or title of a deacon. And different churches have different ideas of what deacons do. Some churches, the deacons are the mission council. Some churches, the deacons are the pastoral care arm of the church. Some, the deacons are the community ministry arm of the church. Some deacons, in some churches, it's usually smaller churches, are the people who get the coffee ready and vacuum the sanctuary carpet before worship comes in. Before worship begins, rather. So in different places, in different churches, that role of deacon means different things. But under the big umbrella of service and compassion. These are the people who are out to serve and to bring compassion to other people and into the world. And then finally, the ministry of word and sacrament. And those are our pastors. That's a specific ordination. So the Book of Order has 3 distinct orders in the life of the church. Not one is more important than the other. And each one requires a different set of gifts. That's how the Book of Order lays it out. It's rooted in our theology, that each one of us brings to bear gifts that may meet the needs of these particular ordered ministry. There may be people who can do multiple ones. There may be folks who only really have gifts for one. But we recognize that each is important in the life of the church. Now, this is more of the technical side of our conversation. As we were studying best practices for a church of our size, we were looking at different forms of governance that churches, Presbyterian churches, and other nonprofits were looking at as the culture continues to change, as we move away from a real strict volunteer-based culture to a professionalized culture in many different spheres, including nonprofits, including churches, where people are being pulled in multiple directions to volunteer, not just at their church, but at their school, at their Rotary Club, in the service group, and all these other places. So where people's time is becoming more and more valuable each and every day, and in the reality that it takes a good hour to get from West Paces Ferry on Peachtree to here, and we think about how that is a real life impediment for people to serve on committees, to serve on teams. And as we're thinking about the ways in which some other churches, let me just say it this way, there are, of the 40 largest Presbyterian churches in the country, PCUSA churches, First Pres is number 36, okay? That's 9,000 congregations. We're number 36 on that list. A quarter of those congregations, 10 of them, have moved to smaller governing boards, including, I'll give you an example, Bel Air in LA, which is a 2,300 member church, went to a governing board of 12, a session of 12. And you think of LA, I know it's a little, we do have some movie stars here, but it's a little different culture, a little different pace, but there's still some of the same problems in an urban location. How do you put volunteers and servant leaders in the best place to serve? And to be very mindful and critical about the ways, what we're asking people to actually do, and to make sure their gifts and their passions are aligning with the work. I have a list of those churches, those 10 churches, if anybody wants to know more about those who have gone ahead of us in this particular work. Okay, so the ministry of discernment and governance, best practices that we've unpacked and uncovered through this process. Number one is that many churches are thinking about or have already reduced the size of their governing board. To be very particular about who's coming on the board, not by character or by individual, but the spaces we have on the board, and that those folks are equipped and have the time and the talent to give to that particular ministry area. And they're creating new ministry opportunities for people who have different gifts in different ways. Number two, when it comes to a governance structure, that the session should provide a strong support and accountability system for the head of staff. 3, operate with a strategic mindset, letting go of silo and interest-based thinking. Right now, our structure is elders represent particular ministry areas. And so there are times where their elders, and this is not their fault, where they're mindful of whatever ministry area they're quote-unquote representing, and can, from time to time, lose focus that they're not supposed to be representing one contingent in the church, but rather their work in discernment and governance is the whole. It's not just one area, it's the whole life of the church. So 4, focus work on issues pertaining to church policy, personnel, and creating systems and structures so the congregation lives into its vision. And then develop more efficient, decentralized structures of lay leaders who are focused on specific and discrete ministry tasks. And I'll show you how that fleshes out right now. Our current, right now, leadership structure, and I say right now because it's the one we're still operating, but what session is voted on is to shift and by May 1st begin to live into this new leadership structure, which means the nominating committee will be instructed by this new document, by this new plan. So this is happening, but our current model right now is that we have 30 elders, 6 trustee elders, and 2 youth elders. That means there's 38 plus the 5 installed pastors, which means at a board meeting, there's 43 people. Okay, there's 43 voting members There are, like I said, 5 installed pastors. We have a nominating committee of 4 elders and 8 at-large members. And the nominating committee, as you know, is the group responsible for putting in nomination elders, and then where we need it, pastoral nominating committees to search for pastors. Right now we have councils. We have 9 at-large members per council. 3 elders are assigned per council. 6 as trustees, so there's the 6 trustees are their separate thing, and there are the council names. Now let me just say that this is relatively new. Okay, this 9-person council members. When I got here, one of the mandates from the session, from the 2014 document that the session adopted, was to get more people, new people, involved in leadership. That was a big charge. Some of you remember those conversations. And one of the challenges was, when we came to the councils and committees, we realized that there were no term limits. And we realized that there were some people, for example, on personnel, that had served there for 2 decades. 2 decades. And didn't have an out to step off, right? Their term never expired. So here's the challenge. How do you bring new people in when there aren't seats available, right? So taking that to heart, the session engaged in coming up with term limits for our councils and having a set number so new people could come in and to serve in those particular areas. So I want to put that out there to say that that's new, because when I show you leadership numbers in just a few minutes about some of the changes in numbers, the amount of numbers we have currently is a relatively new phenomenon because of these term limits and because we've created an equal number of seats in these ministry areas for people to serve. Here's the new leadership structure. Here's the bread and butter of it. We're going to have a session that is 15 elders. 6 of those will serve as trustees. We're going to take the book of order, and we're going to inaugurate, or reconstitute, I should say, the ministry of deacons. We're calling them ministry leaders. We're calling them ministry leaders, and these are people who are engaged in service and compassion in our various ministry teams. Let me be very clear about this. There will not be a board of deacons. You don't have to have a board of deacons to have the ministries of deacons. You can have an ordered ministry of deacon that have discrete roles in the life of a particular church, that are voted on by the congregation, that have gifts, that are ordained. They're ordained, but they don't have to be a functioning board. And in our case, they will be assigned to particular ministry areas, and we'll show you that in just a second. So if you flip the page, those ministry areas are outlined here. Let me just give a little bit of rationale, and I'm going to get to more questions and answers, because I think some of what will get fleshed out is probably on your mind, and it'd be better fleshed out rather in a Q&A form. But we will still have term limits for our councils and our ministry areas. But if you look on the, I'm sorry there's no pagination here, but if you look, we're going to change the ministry areas a little bit. We'll have arts, care, community ministries, discipleship, emerging generations, global missions, servant leadership, and social ventures. Those last 2, servant leadership and social ventures, are brand new, per our long-range strategic plan. And what you see goes away. Now, this is some of the harder work, right? What you see goes away is worship council, connections council, property management team, futures team, communications, personnel, finance and asset management team, which is a sub-team of the trustees. That work will be the principal work of the session. Now, this is some of the hardest stuff to get our minds around, right? Because in the past, we've got all these other teams doing this, but it presents a challenge, and here's the challenge. I'll use personnel as an example, which is an area that I'm deeply resourced in and I'm deeply connected to. We have a very competent personnel council, very competent. Serves as a support for me and the staff and a sounding board for the decisions that we make. But most of the day-to-day operations get carried out by me and by Rebecca when it comes to staff. Like you'd expect in a 2,000-member congregation that has a $5.3 million budget, with $3.3 million of it is staffing. The personnel doesn't get into the weeds. They help us in the 30,000-foot view, performance plans and structures, salary structures. They're not doing check-ins. They don't meet with personnel because that's not how we're established. I'm the head of staff. Rebecca takes a lot of that responsibility as well, and we implement the session's vision through the staff. So what the challenge is that if you're a session member and you're not on personnel, $3.3 million of the $5.3 million budget, you don't even have any engagement in at all. And that's a challenge. If you're in the leadership body and you have no say or influence or any conversation points there, then there's a miss. I think there's a gap. Take worship, for example. And Jens, I don't think, is in the room, but Jens and I talk about this all the time. We love the worship council. They are like the cheerleaders of our worship in this congregation, and they're also idea generators. Let me just say that. But most of that meeting, if you've ever been on worship council, you know this, is reporting. Is me coming and saying, hey, here's what's happening. Jens is saying, here's what's happening. We talk about ushers. It's time that is probably better spent. There may be a task force in worship, like let's say, I'm not saying this is, I'm just using it as an example. Like there's a task force that'll look to maybe start a new service or implement a new hymnal. The session can still charge a group to do that. Can still put a task force together to go and do that. But we don't necessarily need a standing committee. And ultimately, worship is session's responsibility. It's outlined in the Book of Order. Communications is another example. We've got great people, great thinkers in here who have been part of discrete projects to launch certain things out of communications, but the day-to-day operations are not done by volunteers. They're done by a very competent staff. And so these are areas where we're trying to reduce redundancy, where we're trying to free people up so they can do things that are more attuned to their gift set and more meaningful in the life of the church, rather than really, I'm going to say in some cases, not all the time, but really wasting their time in committee meetings that don't need to happen. And this is a hard reality, right? This is a hard truth. But I've been here for 4 years. I've been to almost every committee meeting, subcommittee meeting, and I've seen it with my own eyes. I am an instigator of it. I bring my reports, and we report, and then we're done. And people are like, why did I brave the traffic to get here? So how can we free those individuals to do meaningful, really connected work to their gifts? Okay, so last thing I'll cover, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Just right here on this page with the numbers. This is important. In the new model, we will have 119 leadership spaces, okay? Leadership slots. These are individuals. Some of those, there's some redundancy, but because they serve on the nominating committee, for example, or they serve as a trustee. But 119 leadership positions. Our current model, or our previous one, is 127. But again, let me put this caveat out there. That 127 is a 3-year-old number. It was far less than, it was not far less, but it was less than 119 4 years ago. Because we didn't have committees or councils that had term limits or had a certain designated number of seats. Some committees only had 4 or 5 people, not 12. Does that make sense? So where we're at right now, I think, is in a very healthy place. When we think about the delegation of work, the empowerment of leaders with their particular gifts, and the ways in which we can set people up, I really believe this, for success. And what I mean by success is faithfulness. Faithfulness to God and their call upon their life, faithfulness to the call of this church, faithfulness to the ministries that we can connect our gifts to. This opportunity is one that many churches, as I said, at least a quarter of the top 40 in the country are taking advantage of, are moving toward, because their demands or their contexts are very similar to ours. Being intentional about putting people in the right place, using their gifts for the right ministries, and freeing them up to be as effective as they can in the life of the church. So that's the presentation. There's a FAQ sheet on the back that you can dive deeper into. But right now, I'd love to entertain questions that you have that of something that may be interest, or maybe there's a concern. And by the way, I'll preface our open time with this. We did a consensus model conversation. Florida Ellis, who's not a serving currently on session, I invited Florida to come and sort of be a presence keeper and help us with sort of a consensus model. And she worked with me. Instead of just doing an up and down vote, we had a very intentional conversation in June around consensus and about how do we arrive at consensus. And let me just say, the majority of the elders, including me, still have questions. And we still have a lot of what ifs. Like, what if this happens, or what if that happens? We don't know the answers to those, but we came to consensus and said there are no questions on the table. There's no questions on the floor that prohibits us from entering into this new model. But this isn't like, well, of course, why would you do anything else? This is a sense of God's Spirit calling us into this direction with questions and a bit of unknowns that we still don't know. But the session, in its unanimous voice, believes that this is the way we ought to go in the days ahead. So questions, comments, or concerns, and I'll repeat them because we don't have Charlie. We don't have microphones.
Like the two youth elders are cut.
Yeah.
Is there an aspect of this new plan that will still proactively empower youth involvement?
Right. So the youth elders are cut, and one of the principal reasons is that when you have a term that's only 1 year, you're out of order with the Book of Order, right? If you're having a consistent term that there's 3-year terms for your elders, we ask usually a senior, which is the busiest year of their, well, it could be junior to senior year, is a pretty busy time for them. We have very competent youth elders right now. We talked to them about this. They were engaged in the process. Jay York, as our youth director, was engaged in the process. Here's the thinking. That right now, we have opportunities to plug in our youth in these ministry areas. So the ministry of deacon could be very much, and look, by the way, any member of the church can be ordained an elder. So if there's a youth that has gifts for leadership and they're a freshman or a sophomore, they should be in nomination. If they have the gifts to do governance. The hard part is, if you're a freshman or a sophomore, and I have one of those, is they don't have the first clue about like personnel items. And this is really about giftedness. And we love it used to be like we got to have youth be there to represent the youth. I think we set them up for failure when we do that because they don't have the gifts or experience to really carry the water on that work. But they have been to Jamaica, and they have been to Kenya, and they do serve at the homeless breakfast and community ministries. They are engaged in emerging generations work. They've gone to Theo Ed. So why don't we think differently about where we're using their gifts and plug them into ministries where they really have something to offer, something concrete of an experience and gifts. So that's the reason why. Thanks for raising it. I missed it. Yeah.
How will deacons be chosen?
Deacons will be elected by the nominating committee because of their ordered status. They are ordained in the PCUSA. Yeah.
While the
Cynthia.
the total number of those involved in leadership is not changing significantly, the number of individuals involved in governance goes down by more than half.
Yeah.
What steps will we take to make sure that that much smaller body is truly representative of the congregation and is empowered to execute that governance role on behalf of the congregation as a whole?
Yeah. Here's an interesting fact, and I put this in. I'm going to take it in from thanks for the question, a couple different angles. One is, we used to be a church of 3,000 members or so, and the same number of elders have been the same since that time. So we've cut off the roles where people have moved away. Things have changed in the city. About 1,500 members, okay? But we're still the same exact representation in terms of number to number, right? Do you follow me on that? Percentage-wise, from number to number, but percentage-wise, no, I don't know of many people who were saying our board is too small in 2005 or 4 when we were 3,000 members with 36 elders. It's an interesting just thought. But it's a full percentage point less, right, in 2003, 4, 5 than it is right now today. I just think that's an interesting stat, right? I mean, how many people were thinking back then, we're out of whack, right? We've kept the number of elders regardless of our size of our congregation. Interesting, right? I mean, I just think that's interesting. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying that's interesting. Representation is a coin, right? It's got two sides to it. The first is the Book of Order prescribed requirement, I should say, not prescribed, requirement of diversity and representation from the church. That's a Book of Order mandate that does not change. That the people who are on session need to represent the diversity of the church. Gender, racial, ethnic backgrounds, theological backgrounds, right? Orientation, all of that. There needs to be a plurality. There needs to be a recognition of the diversity of the congregation. That does not change. That charge always falls to the nominating committee. That's the nominating committee's job, to make sure that their slate, their nominations, and nothing changes to that end. Nothing changes. The reality, though, on representation from the side, when you get into the room, right? Being Presbyterian, we don't represent the members when you're on the session. I know this is a hard thing because our compassion and our pastoral sense leads us to this, but we represent the will of God in and for the congregation. That's Presbyterianism. So when you get elected, you're elected as a representative. I'm so glad you brought this point up, Cynthia. You're elected as a representative from the congregation. But when you're on the board, you represent the will of God. Now, let me say this. This is going to be counterintuitive, but those who do this kind of work or on nonprofits know this to be true. The fewer the number of board members, the less control the moderator has. Okay? I have more control now. This is one of those questions that people don't want to necessarily ask. It's not going to hurt my feelings. But I have more control now with 40 people, other people in the room, to set the agenda, to create times for conversations, because people, we can't just have a free-for-all. It doesn't work. So I set the agendas, I set the conversations with Mary Ellen, our clerk, and I have a lot of control. Now, I hope you pray for me that I use it wisely and I steward that role well. But as the moderator in a smaller board, it empowers the board to be a co-creator of the work that's in front of us. So that's another piece that I want to name, because I think some people, the default is, well, less people means Tony can be. Actually, less people could be harder for me, or whoever the moderator is, right? Because let's say this, in a board of 15, if 6 people don't think I'm doing a good job, 7 people, 8 people, it's a lot different than 8 people not thinking I'm doing a good job with 36, right? So there is a requirement that the moderator and the session are way more integrated in the preparation and planning of the work than is right now. And the other thing is just a reality, right? When you're 36 elders, it's easy to skip, especially if you don't have anything to present. And I'm not going to sell anybody out, but in my 4 years here, our attendance hasn't been perfect. And I think it's easier when there's more people to not show up thinking that someone else is just going to cover for me or they're going to do it than it is for a smaller group to do it. So thank you, Cynthia. I had 3 parts for that, so thank you. Yeah, Joe.
I'm having some trouble
Yeah.
discerning the difference between the deacons
Yeah.
and the councils.
Yes.
Do those intersect?
They do.
Or
Thank you. The deacons, right now, the elders are in charge of councils in a rotational way. Senior is the chair. Middler is the vice chair. Junior, elder. That'll just simply be replaced by the deacon model, ministry leaders. You'll have your senior ministry leader be the lead for arts or community ministries or global mission, and then funnel that down. And then there's 9 at-large spaces. So those people aren't necessarily, they could be ordained but not ordained for that moment, is what I'm saying.
So the numbers for deacons and the council, the people on the council will be the total, the sum of those.
Right.
24 plus 72?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. That's right.
Okay.
So 96 people serving in those roles. Yeah. Lucretia.
How about term limits?
The term limits will remain the same. So 3 years can do back-to-back terms, and then a mandatory sabbatical year where you go off, but can come back on after that year. Michelle.
Tony, could you address the cadence, the schedule, if you will,
Yeah.
and whether or not that would be impacted by the structural changes
Yeah.
outlined in this document?
Yeah. So that's something that's one of the unknowns about sort of what will be required vis-a-vis the scheduling. So for elders, we know that there'll be less required of them in terms of their time because they're not serving on councils, right? So their work is principally the discernment and governance. The schedule will be the same. We're going to launch in May. We'll do 10 meetings for the year. And then the ministry teams will meet according to their schedule, what's best for their team members. So those are the deacons. But the things we are adding differently is that the first Saturday of January every year, so it won't start until 2020, is we'll have the deacons and the elders come together for planning out for the year. So thinking about worship, thinking about Bible studies, thinking about discipleship, like overarching themes that would be coming up. And then the other time we all get together is in April for the Statement of Faith night, which already happens, but now we'll add the deacons because they're being ordained. They will also present their statements of faith, and it'll be a collective night. So 2 times a year they'll get together. During the year, the cadence of communication will principally go through the senior staff resourcing that ministry area. So let's say that discipleship, Ryan's in the room, I see him. Let's say discipleship, Ryan goes to session. He's not a voting member, but he goes to session. Let's say that discipleship has a big ticket thing that they want to get changed. Maybe it's a funding source issue. So they come and they say, we want to redirect funds to do this in 2019. He may come and provide the rationale, or a ministry leader, the deacon, can come and provide the rationale and speak on the floor and present that. But we're trying to eliminate that redundancy where people have to be at every meeting or everything. So Ryan may be able to handle it. The other big thing is we're leaning into, again, on cadence, we're really leaning into when the session approves the budget and launches that year, that we expect the staff and those senior leaders on those ministry teams to execute. So like Ryan, for example, again, discipleship, doesn't come to the session and say, we need to vote on our speakers for Theo Ed. We don't get into the weeds on that because we are empowering, this is that decentralized aspect of it, we are empowering those ministry teams. We've already said yes to the concept. We've already said yes to the big idea because we've approved it on the budget. Now let's get Ryan and that team, and they'll go and do it. They'll execute. So the stuff that really comes before session in terms of voting are, of course, the requirements of baptisms and worship schedules and those kinds of things. But really, it's going to be the 30,000-foot view material. Is this the business we ought to be in? Does this align with our goals? Does this align with our long-range strategic plan? That's going to be the core content. How is our personnel? Are we staffed to accomplish these goals? Is our worship life hitting on the themes of these goals? Right? Big, big ticket items in terms of ministry of discernment and governance. Others? Mr. Woodson. You first have to join the church, Mr. Woodson. I know you have. I know you have. Mr. Woodson, where's Stephanie? See Stephanie right there? She is going to get you connected so that we can start that process. And I'm glad you're here.
There's likely to be some fallout in the transition. Someone perceives that this is good for them.
Yeah.
Does that come basically to you?
Yes. Yeah. So I'll handle, and Rebecca also, but I'll handle, I've taken the point on this particular conversation, and as the moderator, I'll handle any feedback that people want to bring, positive or negative. And one of the assets that we have, besides all the churches that have done this, who have already launched into this, and that we can, and I have relationships with all of these pastors to get to know what some of the pitfalls are and some of the impediments. Bill Todd, some of you know Bill, he's a relatively new member. He teaches at the business school of Georgia Tech. This is like his bread and butter, is governance and polity and board leadership. And he's been a great, and I suspect he will become more of an ally and sort of champion for us, but also somebody who can help navigate some of the landmines as well. So people in-house that are not just from the staff, but lay leaders who have some gifts in this kind of transition work. And mind you, the transition won't formally take place until May of 2019, but the nominating process needs to set us up for that. What we've done is we've asked elders, current sitting elders, that if you want to complete your term, that you're welcome to do that. We're not going to try to fit everybody into the 5, 5, and 5 classes. So people in the class of 2020 have said that they want to do, that there's 9 of them that want to stay on session, so they're going to stay on session. There's others that said, thank you, Lord, because I want to be a ministry leader. I'm not a discernment and governance person. I mean, you know who you are. And it's okay to admit it. I'm a community ministries person, and that's where I'm going to be launched. And so what the nominating committee is going to receive is a sheet of people who've self-selected, and then folks who want to do different roles, and they'll be probably, most likely, if the Lord wills it, to be placed in the nomination in those discrete roles. So as of right now, I think we're at a 9 class for 2020. We're a 6-person class for 2021. And then 2022, of course, will be the first 5-person class. So we won't hit that 15 number in the first year. We'll ease into it over a 2-year period. Does that make sense? So no elder was kicked off, right? Every elder had a chance to discern throughout the summer, and they all got back to me and Rebecca on where they're feeling called into the future. Others? All right. There are probably more questions to come. You can email me, you can call. I'm happy. I love to eat at lunch or at breakfast. And if you want to, my treat, if you want breakfast or lunch, we'd love to do that to talk more about it. There's also all those individuals on the paper. They are diverse in their thinking and have different reasons or different things that they like and some things that still challenge them. The elders as well. Feel free to talk to anybody. We're on the same page here, but that doesn't mean that everybody thinks exactly the same about every item. We'll live into this together. Thanks for your time and your patience in this longer presentation and your feedback, and I look forward to the conversation to continue. See you in worship, or see you soon. Nice show.